So I'm Elizabeth. I work for WordPress.com, which Jeremy talked about a little bit yesterday, but we are a publishing platform. You can use our software to make a blog or a website. I am a happiness engineer with the company, which is support staff. And I want to talk about how you can use blogging as non-traditional support documentation. I called my talk this, and then yesterday as I was listening to everyone's talks, I was thinking that, like, I'm not really sure if online technical writing is old enough to have a tradition. It seems like we're all kind of figuring out what that might be as we go. But when I talk about our traditional support documentation, we have a support site that I would describe it as sprawling. It's sort of, WordPress.com started, and there wasn't a cohesive vision for the support site from the beginning, and we change a lot of things and we add a lot of features. And as we do this, we sort of just add on to the documentation. We also have a lot of different kinds of users who use our service for a lot of different things. So the documentation is sort of a challenge. It's the support staff who mostly maintains and writes and updates the documentation. We have an editorial team at WordPress.com, but they're more focused on user engagement and also content curation. But one thing that we do really well, especially in the last couple of years, is we have 2 very active company blogs. And I've noticed that the content that we post on these blogs is really helpful with our support documentations. So I'm going to talk about why that is. For one thing, readers can subscribe to a blog, right? You don't really subscribe to a support site. You don't necessarily read it incrementally. But with a blog, you can follow it. And then you can read it when you're in the state of mind, you're looking through your feed reader or you're reading your email subscriptions, and you're thinking, like, now I'm going to take in new information and learn things. Like, you're in that mind frame, so you're receptive to it. One thing that we struggle with a lot at WordPress.com is that we have a whole lot of features, and we also have a lot of new users who sign up. So what we want people to do, we actually have 2 different user interfaces. So one of them is much simpler and more streamlined, and it's for new users to kind of get started right away. And so you can kind of ignore all of the more complicated features until you have a use for them later. But I find that people don't necessarily approach it that way. So anecdotally, what seems to happen is a lot of people block out a Saturday in their week and they say, like, okay, I'm going to sit down and get my website up. And then they see the dashboard and all the different features, and they kind of want to understand all of it right away, and they get overwhelmed with how much there is. So we're always trying to kind of encourage people to take a more incremental approach to engaging with our software, right? So we're like, just sign up, here's the easy flow, you can get started, you can post something, it's really simple. And then as you go along, you can learn more. So blogging is a really good way to encourage this sort of learning, because you get occasional updates from a blog, and it kind of reminds you, like, oh yeah, I started that blog. I was going to do something with that. And I noticed there's a lot of online services that kind of are using this approach or trying to encourage their users to, like, learn in this way. So, like, I don't know if you use Feedly or Trello or even just Gmail, while you're using it, there'll be like a pop-up that's like, have you ever tried this feature? You might want to check it out. Also, blogging turns documentation into conversation. So it sounds pretty good, right? That's my buzz phrase. I was very proud of that one. So we talked about, a few people have touched on feedback for your documentation and how to get that. Most of us probably don't really have comment sections on our support documentation. If you do, you don't necessarily actively monitor it. But when you blog, people are going to comment. So if you blog, it's going to be about any given feature. You're going to have immediate feedback from your users on what they like about it, what they don't like about it, what they don't understand, what they get. And also, blog posts can be shared. So it's also a really good way if there's something that's not new, but you have maybe this really cool feature and you find that your users don't use it as often as you think that they should. So you're kind of wondering why, or if anybody's aware of it. Or if there's like a really common mistake that everyone makes, that or a problem that they have, and you kind of want to clear it up. Writing a blog post about it is a really good way to kind of create buzz around that thing and get it out there and have everybody talk about it. They'll share it on their sharing networks. And so that's a good way to call attention to something that you rather than waiting for people to go discover it in your support documentation. Also, blogs have authors. So a lot of support sites are not written by someone with a face, right? You don't necessarily know who's talking to you. But with Blogger, because I work in support, we're always talking about kind of like creating a relationship with our users that's not just troubleshooting based. So we don't necessarily want to have all of our contact with our users be like after something bad has happened and they're frustrated. So blogging is a really good way to kind of do that proactive support and also proactive documentation. You know, you're doing something that isn't after the fact. So then, you know, and different people they write with a different tone. They tend to write about certain subject matter, so your users kind of get to know the various people who contribute to the blog. Also, I've noticed as a lot of people have been talking about how documentation works at their organization, a lot of you have said like, well, I'm the only person who does this, or like, we have one technical writer, it's me, or we don't have any. So not everybody just intuitively knows how to construct technical documentation or support docs. It's a little bit specialized, so you know, it's not necessarily something that everybody just knows how to do. But people are pretty familiar with how to format a blog post, because we all read, you know, blog posts all the time. So at our company, everybody blogs. Everybody submits blog posts. So this is a really good opportunity for developers and people who don't necessarily always interact with users to talk about what they do and get some feedback. And this is just, this is an example of that. So this is our main company news blog. And you can see this is Min, and she works on partnerships on the VIP team. So we introduced some new e-commerce plugins for our users that they could use on their blogs. And so Min wrote the blog post introducing this. Caroline's a theme developer. All the theme developers write blog posts introducing their new themes. So they get the first, and generally what happens is with any new feature, whoever developed it writes a quick support documentation, and then they write a blog post announcing it. So right away they get feedback from people on, you know, what worked, what didn't work, what's confusing, if there's questions. I mean, obviously we've all looked at it internally, but sometimes there's like a step we missed in the documentation or something a little bit confusing in the UI. So by doing this through a blog post, the person who's most connected to fixing it is the one who gets the first rush of feedback. Oh, I'm going backwards. So Yoan is a designer, and he kind of changed up an existing feature. He made a new design for sharing and reblogging. So when things change, you know, people notice right away, and they have very strong opinions about it. So he wrote the blog post announcing the new design and why he had done that. And then the last one's really interesting. So Paul is our general counsel, our lawyer. And so we had a day, the day we fight back the protesting of the NSA surveillance, and we introduced a widget so our users could put like a banner on their blog. And you know, one of the support staff could have just written a blog post saying like, here's how you can activate this banner, here's how you can use it. But Paul's really familiar with all the law behind it and the legal context of the bigger issue. So it made a lot of sense for him to write this because he could give, you know, a much more interesting perspective on it. And when people inevitably commented with questions about the legalities of the whole thing, he was well posed to answer them. Another really good reason to do blogging is that it's a really easy, fresh start for your documentation. So I think a lot of us probably have some sort of existing block of support documentation, and maybe there's something that you want to change about it. So you say to yourself, at some point I'm going to go through this whole thing and I'm going to like change the tone, or I'm going to add a lot more screencasts, or I'm going to update it because we've had a lot of changes since this happened. One thing we're always saying at WordPress.com is like, we'd like to make our documentation more task-based and less feature-based. So like to say, we're going to go and do that someday, like nobody ever has the bandwidth for it, and it's really difficult to like go through and revamp an entire existing thing. But anybody can start a blog really easily. And if you're not sure if you need a platform for it, I can suggest one. So it's a really easy, low investment way to experiment, both in terms of time spent and also it doesn't cost anything. So, for example, one thing that we're always having to explain to people is the difference between self-hosted, the WordPress software, the open source software, and WordPress.com, which is a hosted platform that uses that software. So this is really confusing for a lot of our users, and we try a bunch of different ways to explain it. So like blogging is a really great way. We can try to explain this over and over again, and like we can use a new metaphor. We can try and explain it this way. We can, and we can kind of see what sticks. And so that lets us play with it, and then we can take what we learned from blogging, and then we can apply it to our existing support documentation on an ongoing basis. So just some examples of how we do this at WordPress.com. We have two blogs. The main one is the WordPress.com blog, which is mostly used to announce new things, but we also use it for other reasons. So we introduce new features and partnerships. This, you can see, we announced embed support for Getty Images. We also use it to explore a certain topic or feature in depth. So we have a lot of different gallery styles, and a lot of people kind of use one or another one, but they're not like super familiar with all the different types. So Sherry, who's one of our editorial team, she's written a post on photo blogging exploring gallery types. And I didn't have room to put the whole thing up there, but she also goes through and she shows how these different gallery types look on like a bunch of different themes that we have. So that's kind of a way to sort of dig into a feature where the support document would just have like an example of each gallery. We also use it to interview staff, and we write articles that highlight our bloggers. So if someone has a post that goes viral, we'll write a post on the blog about them. It was spring break time recently, so Michelle has written a roundup of a bunch of different travel blogs on our service that she wanted to call attention to. And finally, we use it to announce our company activity. Automatic is the company behind WordPress.com. So Rebecca's our events coordinator. We're going to be in South by Southwest. So we put up a blog post saying, like, we're going to be here, here's how we're going to be participating, come see us at the booth, here's some talks that some people with us are giving. The second blog that we have is called the Daily Post. This is more of a user engagement blog. It started out with, like, as a challenge to everyone to blog daily. But we didn't actually blog daily at the time, so it's a little bit hypocritical. But now we do. In fact, now sometimes we even blog twice daily on it. So we host weekly photo and writing challenges that are really popular. A lot of our users like to participate. It's also an easy way for them to build their traffic because they leave comments saying, like, here's my participation, and everybody kind of gets together. This is one of the photo challenges. That's one of my coworkers' babies that he apparently put in storage at some point. We write daily prompts, so every single day there's a prompt for writing for something to blog about. Task-based instruction. This is a post that I wrote on how to create an index on WordPress.com, which is, and this is a good example of experimentation through blogging, because this is a question I got a few times in support. And people could mean a few different things by creating an index. I wasn't necessarily sure what they were after. We don't have any kind of support doc on that. If you searched for index, you wouldn't necessarily come up with anything. The easiest way to do it is probably to make page jumps using anchor text and HTML. So I sort of wrote a post about how to do that, and then I looked in the comments to see like how people responded. So people found it really helpful. I decided at the end of this, I'm like, well, we probably don't really need a support documentation on building an index. It's not like that popular a request. But now we have this if people ask about it, and I also could see from the comments like kind of what they meant, if I guessed correctly. We also give general advice on writing and blogging. So this was one on how to integrate your blog with social media. So this is another interesting example of how support documentation can be a little confusing because we have millions of ways to integrate your blog with social media. So someone who asks about this, they could be asking about sharing buttons on each of their posts. They could be asking, we have a publicize feature that, it's kind of like Buffer, kind of pushes your posts to your different networks automatically. We have like widgets, like Facebook like box you can put in the sidebar. So if someone's just searching for ways to like integrate their blog with social media, they're not necessarily gonna know to search for all of these different features. But we can write a blog post about it that just kind of goes through like, you know, the whole thing and links to the various support docs, and it's more comprehensive and more task-based. We also post interviews with our bloggers on the Daily Post. This is a popular photo blogger. So he hosted one of our photography challenges, and now he's written this post on how to photograph people well. So we can even get our bloggers to contribute to the blogs. Also, in the last couple of months, our editorial team has put together 3 ebooks. One is on photography techniques, one is on 365 days of writing prompts, and one is on SEO and traffic building. And the materials for these ebooks came entirely from our blog posts over the last year or so. So they didn't have to create new material for this, they just already had it. And now we have these resources that, unlike support documentation, are kind of meant to be read front to back. And we can use them as a really great resource for new users. This is just another example of how a blog post kind of helped with our support documentation. So this is our support doc on post formats. And post formats are, if you're familiar with the term custom post types, they're sort of like that. So basically, like your post all looks a certain way, but we have the option where you can pick, you know, this is a gallery post, or this is a video post, or this is a link, and it'll make the formatting a little bit different. Like depending on a theme, some will give it like a different colored background or a little icon. And this is something that is very confusing for new users because it's not, like post formats is our term. You know, it's not like their term. So if anybody's trying to figure out what this is, they're not gonna like search our support site for post formats because they don't have that term. So I don't even know what you would search for, because I guess like colors. So this is the existing support doc, and if you look at it, there's a couple things that could be better. For one thing, it shows 2 visual examples of blogs that are using post formats, but it's not contrasted with blogs that aren't using them. So it's not obvious from these pictures what the post formats are doing. And then at the top, we have the classic, if you have a theme that supports post formats, you can spice up your blog post by posting different types of formats. So we've used the term to define the term, which is not ideal. So I had written a blog post on post formats, which for one thing meant that I went back and looked at the support doc, because since the support team kind of keeps up with the docs, it's like our secondary job. So it had been a while since anyone looked at that one and realized that it wasn't great. And I started my blog post with what's the difference between these 2 blogs. So these images, this is the same blog, same theme, same content. One's using post formats and one isn't. So it's more immediately visible what this feature does. So based on this and the questions that I got in the comments and the ways that people talked about how they would use this or what questions they had, I could then go back and update our support document on post formats. I haven't done it yet, but I will right after this conference. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just an example of how staff blogging can increase user engagement. We noticed that we have a lot of new signups in January, which makes sense because everyone's making their New Year's resolutions. You know, I'm going to start my blog. And also, you've been home for a while and you're like, I'm going to have a family, leave me alone. So, so we decided to kind of capitalize on all these new signups, because our goal isn't signups, right? It's people who continue to be engaged in this software and post frequently. So we ran this challenge, 0 to Hero, 30 Days to a Better Blog, and it was opt-in. And we encouraged people to sign up, and we would give them 30 days of challenges to like kind of get their blog off the ground. And so this is sort of a crappy screenshot, but this is our support, our community support forums. So the way that we did discussion around these challenges was we opened a support thread, and much like the comments on our blog post, you can see like people are asking questions, talking about the challenge, and staff is replying, so we're interacting with them about it. At the end of this, we found that the 0 to Hero participants, they posted an average of 9.6 times per blog in the month of January, which compared to a random sample, the random sample posted an average of 0.2 times. So this means that consistent staff blogging helped the users who participated publish 48 times as often as a control group, which is huge for us. And if you just compare the same users who participated in this challenge with their posting activity in December, it was an 89% jump in posting. And then this says participants voluntarily used shortcodes, so this was like one thing that the woman who kind of ran this and wrote the write-up about it was really impressed with. Shortcodes, of course, are a little, if you have like an embed code for like a YouTube video and it's quite long, we have, you know, an in-service shortcode where you can use just a bit and add width and height parameters and things like that. So it's kind of one of our more complex features, because it's not really difficult, but it looks like code, so people are intimidated by it and they don't really use it very often. So we were really blown away by the fact that people who participated in this 30-day challenge, they became so comfortable with using the support documents and with like having this sort of guided, facilitated introduction to our service, that they actually went and found the shortcodes document and used it. We didn't do a challenge on shortcodes. Someone was just like, I found this great thing that worked really well. So we were thrilled with that. So I hope that this was applicable to whatever your situation is with your documentation. If you have a company blog and it's kind of dead, or you just use it to introduce new features, or you don't have one at all, I really recommend starting one up and just seeing how it goes. I mean, if it doesn't take off or it's not helpful to you, you haven't really invested in anything. It's just a really easy way to kind of experiment and get feedback and improve your support documentation.
Great. One question, and then we will eat.
I'm really excited you gave this talk, because one of the things that I do a lot is I write and edit for one of my clients' corporate blogs, and we started it from scratch. And I'm curious if you have any insight into this, and you may not, because your organization is quite different than this one, but we get a lot of, our marketing section, which is what runs the blog, is technically under the sales and marketing team, and so the sales guys are like, you should write a blog post on this, because it'll help us sell this thing. And we've found, and the salespeople don't seem to care, but literally the only posts on our blog that have gotten comments from people who don't work at the company are the technical ones. They're the ones that say best practices and are more support oriented. Mm-hmm. But we can't get the salespeople to get on board with that. Yeah. Do you have any insights?
I mean, I don't know, because that is quite different than our situation, but I would suggest like maybe if you can talk about their stuff and frame it more like a support thing or an encouragement thing, like here's how you can, I don't know, like if you could make it, approach it from the perspective of how your users could benefit from it, even if they don't. I don't know. Sure.
Thank you so much.